The Edmonton Oilers aren't seriously going to sign 36-year-old Jonathan Toews, are they? On today's edition of Locked On Oilers.
You are Locked On Oilers, your daily podcast on the Edmonton Oilers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's edition of Locked On Oilers. I'm your host, Nick Zararis. I want to thank everyone who's making Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. Locked On Oilers, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel, where you can start the season with a big return. New customers can place a $5 bet and get started with $250 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. So on today's show, we'll talk about the possibility of Jonathan Toews signing with the Oilers. I will break down why I don't think this is a fit personnel-wise, why I think this would be a bad decision in terms of the dynamics of the team. And then, this is also another moral quandary here. And I understand a lot of people are tired of talking about this stuff. And we'll start there. The first segment, we'll start with the moral quandary of this, because I, for one, understand that people are tired of this conversation. I understand that there is a fatigue of relitigating the 2010 Chicago Blackhawks anytime anyone affiliated with that team or that organization gets in the news cycle, whether that's a player getting traded, like Patrick Kane to the Rangers a couple of years ago, when Joel Quenneville's name pops up in the rumor mill as far as future head coaching cycles, Stan Bowman, of course, getting hired by the Oilers, and now Jonathan Toews, who has been out of hockey for about a year and a half now, last played in 2023, was interviewed for a feature in GQ about some lifestyle choices he had made, some alternative treatments he had made to try and get some chronic illnesses better controlled. He said it's something that he has struggled with his entire life, predating his bout with COVID. And if you'll recall, Jonathan Toews had COVID before it was widely diagnosed in February of 2020. He had it very early on, and that, in conjunction with his lingering lifelong chronic illness that makes his recovery process more difficult, all of that together kept him out of hockey for a year. He came back. He played okay when he did. And we'll talk about the hockey aspect of this, but I want to talk about the ethics and the morality of this first, because this is where I'm going to lose people. And I understand if you're listening to this podcast and you're going to say, well, Nick, you did this with Stan Bowman and you've done this with Corey Perry and with Evander Kane. Why do you keep talking about this when it's clear that everyone else has moved on? And I will come out and say it. The way that legacy hockey media has covered this, has covered the fallout of the Brad Aldrich story, is not good enough. There was a lot of self-reflection in 2020 and 2021 from members of the legacy media, from the NHL's partners, who said, we need to do better. We need to support victims. We need to be more sensitive. We need to be more inclusive. And I have yet to see any real substantive or corrective behavior on the front of legacy media in this forum. As much as people can say they want to be better or they want to do a better job, you do actually have to take actionable steps to improving that. And there are ways to go about doing that. So, for example, we can start with the obvious. We talk all the time on Locked On Oilers about our news literacy. Where are we getting our information from? Because where we get our information from often tells us where we're getting the original information from. So, for example, last night on the Amazon hockey Amazon, the Amazon hockey. Wow, that was hard for me to say for some reason. The Amazon hockey broadcast, Frank Saravelli did a hit saying Jonathan Toews was interested in returning to hockey, and both mentioned the name of Jonathan Toews' agent, Pat Brisson, and the agency he works for, CAA, which tells me, oh, Pat texted his friend Frank and wanted to get Toews' name out there so that even if there wasn't that much excitement about this, there would still be the possibility that, oh, if other teams are interested, maybe we should be interested in bringing Toews in. And that's how this works. You'll recall this was the same thing when Patrick Kane got his hip resurfacing done last year prior to signing with the Red Wings. He posted that workout video, and within 2 minutes of the video being posted, Frank Saravelli quote tweeted it saying how excited teams around the league were that Patrick Kane had worked out, even though the video had been posted 2 minutes prior, very clearly symbolizing some pre-organized or pre-arranged messaging. And that's really the crux of this issue for me. The relationship between insider and organization and agents is all too close. You know, you think about the traditional relationship between media and subject matter. There is an adversarial nature to that. You don't need to be friendly, but you don't need to be unfriendly or rude or uncouth, but you are not on the same team. And so much of hockey's media coverage of the league looks at it through the lens of, well, we're all partners here. We're all friends here. And that really gets to the crux of this issue for me. That's what makes me uncomfortable about a lot of this. And there are going to be people listening to this who are going to say, why do you care so much? Well, the entire point, and this is going to sound very idealistic, but I do think it's important you hear it. The entire point of media in its purest form is to give the public actionable information so the public can make decisions, whether that's who to vote for, if you're talking about politics, what to spend money on, if it's a product like going to a sporting event is, you know, going to a game is a luxury service, a luxury product when you consider how expensive it is. And when the stakeholders, the teams, the agents, the players are on the same wavelength and have the same financial incentives as the insiders, the media people, that creates a conflict of interest. There is a fundamental problem when an insider can report something because an agent texted it to them and it's going to benefit everybody involved. That is not how this is all supposed to work. There is supposed to be a separation there between your personal relationships and your professional relationships. And so much of hockey media is everyone buddy with each other. You know, you think about, well, what was the NHL like a year and a half ago when Toews mounted that mini comeback and played the one season with the Blackhawks? You know, why would the Blackhawks, who the only team Toews has ever played for, very, very directly and on the record come out and say, well, we don't really want to bring him or Patrick Kane back. We don't think that would be in our best interests. We appreciate what they've done for our organization, but we would like to move forward and not look to the past at this time. That tells me that at least those people in that organization were able to recognize that, hey, maybe it's a little bit toxic. Maybe we don't want to continue to affiliate ourselves with people affiliated with that team when we can help it. You know, when you're desperate, you're going to break certain, in case of emergency, glass and break out, you know, retirements for jerseys and player Ring of Honor ceremonies to try and garner some fan enthusiasm when the team is really bad. But that'll do it for our first break, for our first segment. When we come back after our first break, we'll talk a little bit about why I don't think Toews would be a fit for the Oilers right now. Coming up next on today's edition of Locked On Oilers. The NFL playoffs are almost here, but it's not too late to get in on the regular season action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, new customers can finish the season strong with $250 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. FanDuel has so many ways for you to pick up a W. Prop bets like touchdowns, receptions, yards, completions. This week in the NFL, 2 Saturday games, no Thursday night football. The Browns taking on the Ravens, the biggest spread of the season. The Ravens 19.5-point favorites at home. Saturday night, the Bengals trying to stay alive in the playoff hunt. The Bengals 1.5-point road favorites at the Steelers. And then one of the best games of the season. Regular season comes to an end. Vikings at the Lions, where the Lions are 2.5-point favorites with the number one seed in the NFC on the line. Visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your chance at $250 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out on this Friday edition of Locked On Oilers as we're getting set for the weekend. And yes, I will be doing the Wednesday episode. I owe you guys for missing because I was sick after the game tonight. If I remember correctly, I want to say the Oilers are playing the Ducks. If I remember correctly, yeah, they're playing the Ducks tonight at 9. So to make up for not doing an episode on Wednesday, we will have an episode for you on Saturday morning. So if you're typically looking for a little content on the weekend and the show doesn't typically have your schedule covered, I got you this week. Still fighting it a little bit, definitely closer to 100% than I was yesterday, but still not all the way back. Haven't worked out, haven't ran. So another day or two, a little more sleep, a lot of fluids, hopefully be good to go 100% to start next week. But as far as Jonathan Toews and a fit with the Oilers, aside from the fact that his general manager in Chicago, Stan Bowman, is the Oilers general manager, there is no fit here. Logistically and roster-wise, there is not a fit here. The Oilers already have a logjam at the forward position where they are trying to shoehorn forwards into spots they might not necessarily fit as well as they maybe should. You think about how Kasperi Kapanen has found a way to stick. You think about how Podkolzin has found a way to stick. And just trying to be fair, I don't think it's in your best interest as a general manager to just drop a guy into this team with Toews' profile or reputation. And there's layers to that. There's the off the ice, the connections to the Brad Aldrich stuff, the connections to Patrick Kane's uncouth behavior off the ice as well. And Jonathan Toews will be in the Hall of Fame. He's got 3 Stanley Cups. He's got 2 Olympic gold medals. He has a World Junior gold medal. He's one of the most decorated players of his era. This is not a question about his hockey ability, though we will talk about that in the third segment. You do not drop somebody like this onto a team that's already well established. And a lot of people would push back and say, well, if any type of team can handle another veteran with tons of experience and another voice coming in, it is a strong locker room. And I would push back on that ever so slightly because I personally feel that when you have something that works, Connor McDavid has grown into that captaincy. Connor McDavid has had that captaincy now for a long time, for a lot of the formative years of his life. You think about what you were doing at 20, 21, 22 years old. You were going through college, trade school, whatever, trying to figure out what you were going to do with your life. And Connor McDavid was grinding away with the weight of that seed bearing down on his chest, trying to figure out who he was going to be as a hockey player, as an ambassador for the sport of hockey, as a person, as a man. And there's a whole lot that goes into that personal journey. And I personally feel that bringing in somebody who has Toews' track record of being outspoken, of being captain, can only add volatility to another situation that doesn't necessarily need volatility. There aren't qualms about the Oilers' leadership. They have a very good group. They have a group that has experience together. A lot of this team, the bones of this team, have been together for a long time, and there's a lot of value in that continuity where you can have it. And of course, the Oilers had roster turnover this past season. You turn over 3D, you turn over 3 forwards in one offseason. That's a lot in one offseason, but the Oilers have steadied the boat here. They have figured out what they need out of the guys they currently have. And dropping Toews, who hasn't played hockey in a year and a half, into this group creates several layers of issues that would need to be resolved. Number one, who's coming out of the lineup? I'm sure a lot of people would just say, well, take Derek Ryan out. Okay. Is Jonathan Toews going to sign with a team to play fourth line minutes at 36 years old? Is Jonathan Toews going to accept he's a part-time player at this point in his career? His last full season in Chicago, he was playing 17-something minutes a game, close to 18 minutes a game. Granted, that Blackhawks team was awful and there weren't really expectations there, but I do think people need to be a bit more grounded in this, and you don't bring a guy like this in if you are settled and established. Last year when the Oilers brought Corey Perry in, there were questions about this Oilers team. They were still mired in that early season struggle. They had yet to really find their game yet. They brought Perry into the mix a couple years ago when they really needed some oomph up front. They brought in Evander Kane on a cheap deal. And that's the thing. When you're desperate, you don't get to be picky and choosy. You don't have the luxury of saying, well, we don't really want to do this, but we can't afford to not. Now, though, the Oilers are not in a position where they need to do something desperate. They're not in a position where they need to spend I shouldn't say spend. They're not in a position where they should feel obligated to do this. Now, I, for one, and after the first segment, this might not surprise you, I, for one, am not particularly going to take Stan Bowman at his word as far as an evaluation of what Jonathan Toews is in 2025. I almost said 2024, but 2025. Because there is a pre-existing relationship there, and we know how hockey works. Guys take care of their guys, and it would not surprise me in the slightest if the Oilers went a little bit out of their way to make this work. But being that, A, the Oilers need to accrue cap space, B, there isn't an obvious spot for Toews in the lineup right now, C, you have no idea what type of hockey shape he's in, and D, you have no idea if he's even effective as a hockey player anymore. When you have that many question marks about a player who's going to come with a little bit of baggage, I don't think you can justify that to yourself, to the other people in your front office, to the guys on the team. And no one on the team would say a word. If the Oilers did sign Jonathan Toews, everybody would be giddy that they got a guy with 3 cups on the team because they're professionals and they understand that there are certain things you just don't say because it makes things unnecessarily complicated. We're going to take one more break on today's show. We'll talk about why Toews probably skills-wise isn't ready to play hockey anytime soon. But we got to take one more quick break. Be right back. Today's show is brought to you by our friends at Rocket Money. With so many subscription services these days, it's hard to keep track of all of them. And with Rocket Money, they helped me track down a few subscriptions I forgot I was even paying for. It's like having a personal assistant for your finances. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps you find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills so you can grow your savings. It brings everything together in one place. Whether it's subscriptions, your spending habits, or even the goals you want to hit this year, Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all of the app's premium features. For me, one of the best features is the savings feature, where I can help put money aside to set up my future. There is no more stressing about budgeting every month with Rocket Money's goals feature. Cancel your unwanted subscription and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/lockedon today. That's rocketmoney.com/lockedon. rocketmoney.com/lockedon. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out on this Friday edition of Locked On Oilers as we're talking about the potential fit for Jonathan Toews with the Oilers. And I will say, if Stan Bowman wasn't the GM, I don't think this would be a story. I probably wouldn't be doing this episode. But the simple matter of the fact is that connection definitely puts him a little bit closer to an NHL comeback. And it raises a fair question. this is something that we as a society are grappling with and trying to come to terms with in real time in the 21st century is when a public figure does something wrong, how do they go about bettering themselves, correcting their bad behavior, atoning, making the people who were hurt feel whole? And then we can start to talk about forgiveness, second chances, etc. And I don't want to make Jonathan Toews culpable for the actions of Stan Bowman, of John McDonough, of Patrick Kane. I don't want him to solely be the focus, the sole focus of my ire, because this has a connection to the Oilers. Because I don't know Jonathan Toews as a person, and this is complicated when you only know figures through their public perception. And all of the hockey media people who I spent the entire first segment critiquing swear that Toews is a very well-spoken and knowledgeable and genuinely caring person. The guy who pitched the green hockey schedule of minimizing travel and scheduling baseball-style series where you would play the same team 3 times in a row, knock out all your games in one trip, and minimize travel to try and reduce the wear and tear on guys' bodies and to try and reduce the ecological impact of the game. But I also struggle to square that away with my feelings about how he handled what happened in 2021 when the news came out, and how Patrick Kane went out of their way to kind of go to bat for Stan Bowman, even though Stan Bowman was unequivocally in the wrong. And I struggle to grapple with what it says about the sport that guys like Bowman, like Kane, and to a lesser extent Toews and Quenneville, that these guys, because of their successes as hockey players, they get off lighter. They do not bear the full brunt of the impacts, or they do not bear the full brunt of the public's ire because of their successes. That I know there will be 5 mean-spirited comments under this calling me some type of name for being a lib or a soy boy or a pronoun boy or whatever. And this is an open-ended conversation. I don't know what the right answer is as far as the morals of this situation. I just know I feel uncomfortable that this Oilers team that has spent so much time trying to climb out of a self-inflicted dark age because it spent so much time chasing ghosts is once again considering the possibility of chasing another ghost. You know, Jonathan Toews has no connection to this team. He hasn't won anything as an Oiler, but he won in Chicago. That's great. That worked in Chicago, 9 years ago, 12 years ago, 14 years ago. It's great they won those Stanley Cups when they did. It's an accomplishment. It's something you feel good about. But it's also something that you have to put in the context of the situation, because the Oilers and lots of other teams have gotten into trouble in trying to import the credibility of other organizations. Because when you lop guys on from other organizations that have had success, you immediately expect that that success is transitive, that because they were successful somewhere else, that they're going to be good here. And that's just not how sports work. That's not how life works, frankly. Just because someone's good in one place doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be successful somewhere else. And I mean, I hate to be that guy, but just look how Duncan Keith went. Look how Duncan Keith's tenure in Edmonton went, and what the Oilers were trying to do, credibility, experience, leadership, against the backdrop of what was a changing team. And it took the Oilers a while to figure that out. Now, look, if you want to say the Oilers need Jonathan Toews for his hockey ability and not because of the intangibles, okay, that's a conversation that we can directly have. If you look at the underlying numbers, he was on a very bad team, so you can give him a smidge of grace as far as how culpable he is in those stats tabulations. but 30 something points in 50 games, 17 minutes a game, power play time, those numbers are fine. You also have to accept those numbers are 16 months ago, 17 months ago, and he hasn't played in a competitive hockey game since spring of 2023, and it's January of 2025. And as we always talk about, shape versus practice shape versus game shape, even if he's returned to skating, that's great and all. And if he's at his playing week, great. He hasn't played in a game where he's going to be hit almost 2 years. He hasn't played in a game where someone on the other team is going to just try and knock his head off because he's in the way. And there is something difficult about getting your body back into that mindset after such a long layoff. People can do it from time to time where they sit out a year, maybe a little more than that. And usually it's injury induced, not voluntary. But Toews feels like if he has something left, he owes it to himself to try and see it through. And that I can understand. That I can respect. And I, of course, sitting here doing Locked On Oilers, do not have pull. I cannot whisper in Stan Bowman's ear that this is a bad idea. I don't think this helps the Oilers. I don't think adding Stan Bowman to the Oilers, adding Jonathan Toews to the Oilers would do anything drastic. Ideally, he probably plays about as well as Adam Henrique is right now. And the Oilers already kind of maybe have an Adam Henrique problem, which we talked about on yesterday's show. But that'll do it for today's edition of Locked On Oilers. If you could be so kind, please subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify, please leave the show a 5-star review. If you're watching over on YouTube, hit the subscribe button. Let me know. Would you be interested in Jonathan Toews on the Oilers this year? Let me know down in the comments. I will talk to you guys tonight after the Ducks game. See you guys then.